My friend, welcome to the world's best kept secret podcast, the podcast that shows spiritual entrepreneurs how to clarify their message and then how to turn that clarity into revenue. I'm your host, Prima Jope, a mentor and message expert since 2020. Whether you seek to simply clarify your message or feel ready to monetize your brilliance, this is your safe space for actionable guidance and practical tools on how to turn your woo into predictable revenue. Let's get started, shall we? Welcome back to this one, and today we're going to talk about how to find your value. A lot of people end up being suicidal. They end up really unhappy. They end up stuck in life because they've never taken the time to find their value. You're not on this planet by accident. You're on this planet because you have a purpose, because you are supposed to bring a change in this world. But a lot of us never give ourselves permission to step into that, find what value we can bring and take that to life. And what ends up happening is the more you don't find your value, the more you really stand a chance of being unhappy. The more you can end up feeling worthless, the more you can end up being suicidal, the more other people can show you what your value is. And I can tell you now, if you don't know your value, any other person looking on the outside won't see the value. And so the best thing really which you can do for yourself is find your value and lean into it. With me is Steve Mark, and Steve is an amazing, amazing human being who spent a fair share of his life turning his pain into something that is changing the world. Steve is someone that was once suicidal because he didn't know his value, because he never stopped to think, what do I bring to the world that is outside of me being a nurse, that is outside of me being whatever the label he had on. He was suicidal, and that was his turning point. He had to find his value, and now he's stepping into that value to really help everybody else find their value so they can create the life that they want. If you're in a place where you feel lost, you feel stuck, you feel like you don't know what your purpose is, you feel like no one sees your value, and you feel like there's no reason for existence, this might as well just be the best episode you've watched with us. This is School of Hard Knocks. He's been there. He's suffered. He's had the pain. This is someone really just teaching from their tears. His framework was literally developed from an attempt to save his own life. And so if you're looking for real, raw, and transformational stuff that can change your life, Steve is your guy. At the end of this episode, what I want you to do is I want you to think through who is the one person that I know that in their life, this information would change their life. We want to flip someone's life. And if you're watching this, you are the vessel for this message. So who do you know that is at the end of their life? Who do you know that is so unhappy? Who do you know that is suicidal? Who do you know that doesn't make sense of what's happening in their life and needs hope in their life? I want you to have those people in your mind as we go through this, and at whatever point you decide to hop off, I'd love for you to share this episode with them. And it's simple how we do that. It is literally, I saw this episode, I saw this video, I saw this interview, and I thought about you. I believe together we can change the world one person at a time. And it begins with you thinking about one other person and simply sharing this with them without any expectation, but just to bless them and hopefully to give them a chance to experience a different life. Without further ado, Steve Mark, welcome to the World's Best Kept Secret. I am so honored that you made it.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. What is it that I missed out as I was going around about what you do and how you do it? What is it that you wish I said in a very short blurb form that I kept just moving around? Like, Prima, just say this. Like, what is it that you do?
Um, I help people to I help people to embrace their innate value.
Mm,
A few years ago, I got this pathway. Really, this is not mine. I
mm,
stole it from my friend. So my friend Clint wrote a book called "Responding to the Call: Resuscitating the Heart of Man Back to God." And in
mm,
that book, he and I are both first responders. We have first responder background, and we're both nurses now. So anyway, he made a metaphor of the work that we do as first responders,
mm,
which is responding to a call, uh, a call for help, right?
mm,
Made that a metaphor to what we should do as believers. So this works too, right? If somebody's listening and I'm not, I'm not pushing religion. I have my own belief system. I'm a Christian, but so that's the direction that I come from.
mm,
But the information is still valid if somebody chooses not to believe that way. That's okay.
mm,
So
mm.
this isn't a Sunday morning service. Um, but anyway, um, so the journey that the kind of the stair step thing that he created in that book, and I've kind of
Mm,
taken it on, is relationship gives identity.
mm,
Identity establishes value. Value is really what we're going to start with today.
mm,
Identity establishes value. Value establishes purpose, and purpose reveals responsibility.
mm. Can you say that again?
So what I find
Relationship,
this was
relationship, identity.
relation
Mm,
relationship is relationships gives identity.
mm-hmm,
Identity establishes value.
mm-hmm,
Value establishes purpose,
mm,
and purpose reveals responsibility.
mm. Real good.
So, in my own case, my
Mm,
own experience, well, anyway, you asked me what I do for people. I help people to see and then embrace their innate value.
mm.
And
Your
from that
internet
value,
is
we can move out both directions.
your
I
internet
have value,
seems
so I can,
your internet seems to be cutting. Do you think
so
it's
from the,
me?
all right. So I help someone to see and embrace their
Mm,
God-given value. And then from
mm,
there, we can, whichever
mm,
one's more important, we can move out both directions, right? I need to be from value. I can understand that
mm,
I can be secure in my identity
mm,
and my relationships have peace.
mm,
Or from a position of value, I can
mm,
now see my purpose.
mm,
So you mentioned people being stuck, right? So
mm,
from my value, I understand what my value is. In the world of sales, we call it a unique value proposition.
mm,
So what is your unique value proposition as a person? Not in what you sell, not
mm.
in what you do, but who you are as a person. So
Wow.
from that value, then I can see my purpose and I
Mm.
can start moving towards my purpose. And once I understand my purpose, then the responsibility comes clear. This is the things I need to do to achieve my purpose.
So take me back to if I don't know what my innate value is, how does that show up? How does that affect my ability to be happy? How does that affect other people? How does that make me? What happens if this information is ignored or unknown? What happens in the ignorance of my value or this work? I'd like
Well,
for the person who is listening to kind of see how this is going to help them based on where they are at.
yeah.
Mm,
Um, so they say ignorance is bliss,
mm,
and that's not always true. Without value, then we just kind of float along, right? And so, in fact, and this is what I was doing. I grew up without any value. Throughout my teenage years, a lot of my adult life, right? I just don't have any value.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I am worthless.
Mm.
So I'm still doing things.
Mm-hmm.
I started a business and I had employees and my customers liked me and I'm married and have kids, like all that external outside stuff. So one of the things that it shows up, I don't have any value, is trying to acquire
Mm.
these external things. Because
Mm.
if I had a new car, then I would be happy. If I
Mm.
had, if I had the newest, latest phone, if I had pick something, right? If I had the next job, if I had that office, if I had more money, like all those external things.
Mm.
And so I've had a lot of those different things. Those things don't make you happy.
Mm.
Well, so happiness is transitory. It comes and
Mm.
goes, right? I'm happy today, and then this afternoon I'm sad because of this thing that happened, right? So happiness comes and goes.
Mm.
Without identity, it's hard to have joy.
Mm.
Um, and the reason that joy is important is because joy is just something that I decide. That's who I decide to be.
Mm.
I am joyful. I can be joyful in my circumstances
Mm.
because I know what my value is. So I might still pop a tire, when I go into town today. I might still blow a
Mm.
tire, and that would make me unhappy, but it doesn't affect my joy.
Mm. So
That kind
this
of thing.
value that you're talking about, is it internal? It sounds to me like internal value more than external value.
Yeah,
Could you give us
right,
more to that?
right,
Give us a little bit more, because a lot of people find value or look for value in external things. I have this job, I'm the manager, I am earn this
right,
money, I have this car, I have this house, I buy food, so I am bringing value. But they forget the value that you're talking about, which is, I think, internally knowing that you have value, even though no one sees that, like the value you bring to yourself. I don't know. Could you say more? Because I feel like a lot of people see value externally, which is not what we're talking about here.
right. I think,
Mm.
well, in the US at least, but maybe I was talking with a lady in Australia the other day, and she said
Mm.
that she and I are both nurses. She's in Australia, I'm in the US, and we
Mm.
both said the same kinds of things about the healthcare system. So my thought is,
Mm.
and I've traveled to other countries, my thought is that people around the world are much more alike than we are different.
Mm.
Like we look different and we have different things that we do, but I think most people are much more alike than we are different. Um,
Mm.
so plus people in other country have fabulous food, but
Mm.
um, so value in the U.S. value often comes like we're talking about from external, right? Get that
Mm.
next office, I get that next thing. It's always the next thing,
Mm.
and so I'm never really happy with where I am right now. Like for a lot
Mm.
of people, I'm never really happy with where I am right now
Mm.
because I have to go to the next thing. And when I got
Mm.
this thing let me down. I got this new relationship, right?
Mm.
So I went out and got a new girlfriend. Don't tell my wife that. She'd probably be unhappy. But so I go out and get this new girlfriend, this new boyfriend, whatever,
Mm.
because that relationship will make me happy.
Mm.
But then it turns out that my wife is not perfect.
Mm-hmm. They're human.
Yeah, yeah. So my wife is not perfect. She does some things just wrong,
Mm.
and then other things she does because she didn't know. But
Mm.
either way, she's letting me down, right?
Mm.
Or we could
Mm.
probably reverse this, and
Mm.
maybe my wife's husband isn't perfect.
Mm.
I'm willing to entertain that possibility.
Mm.
Um, anyway, I was looking for this external relationship, this new boyfriend,
Mm.
this new girlfriend. That person's
Mm.
going to make me happy, right?
Mm.
Except that it doesn't. And now, in fact, I'm even more sad because I had this high expectation, which really
Mm.
puts a lot of pressure on the other person to like
Yeah.
continually perform, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Um,
You're looking for a
so
performance, not a
yeah,
partnership.
so I grew
Mm.
up in a world of performance-based acceptance.
Mm.
We didn't have language for that at that time, but that's what it was. And I grew up in church, and so I learned all the
Mm.
verses about like God loves you and like all that kind of stuff. But the
Mm.
message that I got, like the takeaway from that, is that God's always angry with me and I'm never good enough. And
Mm.
that was shown to me in the way that so I was okay. So I was abused and rejected by my mother and neglected by my father, and then spent all of my teenage years in different foster settings. I was in
Mm.
5 different high schools in 2 states. In fact, for a period of time, I was a high school dropout. Um,
Mm.
just I just given up on it. I'm not going to go through those steps, right? Um, because like in the Bible, Solomon wrote the book Ecclesiastes, and that
Mm.
whole thing sums up with so Solomon was the original like high speed celebrity. People came from all over the world to come and see Solomon,
Mm.
and he just had literally everything. I don't know. The Bible doesn't is not clear on what color his helicopter was, but he had
Mm.
everything, right? And he sums it up with it's all meaningless. It's just chasing after the wind. Why bother?
Mm.
And that's how I felt, just even as a kid. That's how I felt.
Mm.
I was always on the outside, so I'm doing the things that a kid my age
Mm.
is supposed to be doing. I played in sports and I did all this stuff. Um, and I covered those things with, I did those things with, I don't know if y'all know her in Africa, but Brene Brown in the
Mm.
US talks a lot
Mm.
about masks and shields. She's a
Yeah.
shame researcher.
Vulnerability.
Yeah, right, right.
Mm.
So I
Mm.
am not going to be vulnerable because
Mm.
I know better. I am not going to be vulnerable. I've done that before, right? And it didn't turn out good. So
Mm.
never again. So to prevent that vulnerability, I wear
Mm.
masks and I carry around shields so that I
Mm.
can say the things that I'm expected to say. I can smile for the camera when I'm expected to smile for the camera, like all that kind of
Mm.
stuff. And the answer is I'm fine.
Mm. So you play safe, you don't want to deal with whatever.
Right. And as a kid, I didn't know how, right? And
Mm. Mm.
there was no one to talk to about it.
Mm.
Um, so as an adult, the way that shows up, well, as an adolescent too, is
Mm.
going through the motions, feeling just lost, depressed, aimless, worthless.
Mm.
I don't have any value.
Mm.
Um, and again, doing external things because if I acquired all these external things, then I could fill up this big hole eventually,
Mm.
and I could be at like basically at zero, right? I'm just kind of paying back all this debt kind of thing. If we thought about money, just paying back
Mm.
all this debt, right? And eventually I could be at zero. I could be at baseline.
Mm.
So that's what my life was. I didn't have language for it at that time,
Mm.
and I hadn't done any of the introspection to like what's going on. I'm just always running to the next thing.
Mm.
I didn't
What's
do fight or
next?
flight. I didn't do fight
Mm.
or flight. Like somewhere along the line, I heard about that, right? Even when I was young, but
Mm.
I didn't. I didn't have fight or flight. For me, it was just fight all the time.
Fight or fight.
Yeah, yep. And I didn't care if I won or lose. Like I don't care.
Mm.
And so whether sometimes it was physical, sometimes it was verbal, just arguments, right?
Mm.
Um, anyway, so that's how it shows up in life is just kind of going through the motions, feeling
Mm.
stuck, and then
Mm.
probably frustrated too. A lot of people, even that are like really capable,
Mm.
feel stuck but
Mm.
I'm not sure why. I'm not sure why I'm stuck, and I'm not sure how to get unstuck.
Mm.
Like it would be one thing, my dog's on a chain right now. So it'd be one thing if my dog was on a chain. Oh, that's why she can't go very far, right?
Mm.
If we could just see the chain, then that would make sense.
Mm.
But we don't. So for me, the depth of that came, I was 24 years old the first time I was suicidal.
Mm.
Um, and I spent my identity for a long time was, well, relationship. I don't have any relationships that are good, that
Mm.
where I
Mm.
feel secure.
Mm.
And when those relationships threaten to be secure, like because other people are healthy and they're trying to do good things with me, I sabotaged them.
Mm. That's interesting.
I sabotaged the relationships. For example, one of my foster settings was with an aunt and uncle in North Carolina. I was in
Mm.
Wisconsin at that time. I think that I was maybe 14 or so. I'm middle teenager, around
Mm.
around 14, give or take a little bit. Um, so I'm down there with my aunt and uncle, and they have two kids. They have two sons. One's older, and one is like almost exactly my age.
Mm.
They even remodeled their house so that I could have my own room.
Mhm.
Like they demonstrated in their behavior, we want you to be here, right?
You're welcome here. Mm. You're
Yeah.
wanted.
And, and so I wrecked that. I sabotaged that
Well,
enough so they felt like this is not going to work because it was beginning to have problems, create problems in their family. And so they put me on a bus. Like
mm.
it's in 1980, whatever. So we do buses then.
self self-sabotage. Interesting.
Yep. And I spent, that happened when I was a teenager. I was talking with my cousin on probably 40 something. I don't talk to him
Mm-hmm.
very often. And
Mm.
well, he's died now, but so at the time, I didn't talk to him very
Mm.
often, but I happened to be talking to him on the phone. And that
Mm.
event, when they dropped me off at the bus, popped up in our
Mm.
conversation.
Mm.
So, as an example of the stuff that we carry, right? We
Mm.
tell ourselves stories about the way things are, but that doesn't mean that the story we're telling ourselves is true.
Mm.
So, I have a story in my head from the time that I'm like in my heart, actually. I have a story just in me
Mm.
that my uncle had said that he loved me, but he really did not. And I know that because when they dropped me off at the bus station,
Mm.
he just shook my hand and walked away. Didn't hug
Interesting.
me, nothing. That's how I know that he doesn't really like me.
Mm.
So that came up in a conversation with my cousin that we just happened to be having. He's like, huh, would you like to know what really happened?
Mm.
So what really happened is my uncle didn't try to hug me because he thought that if he did, I would beat him up. And so he acted like he was just cool and said, okay, well, have a good trip. See you later. Shook my hand and walked away.
Mm.
My uncle's a grown man. He cried the whole way home.
Well,
That's a story that I carried
mm.
for decades.
I know.
Other people carry stories for decades, but the stories that we tell doesn't mean that the story's true.
It's our story. It's our version. It's from our lens, our broken
Right,
lens. Wow.
right.
Wow. Wow.
So
So what?
that goes directly to value, right? I
Mm.
don't have any value to him,
Mm.
and that was clear because of the way that he treated me when I got on the
Mm.
bus.
So you thought you don't have value, or you thought he didn't see value, or you thought he didn't value you, when really what happened is you self-sabotaged the
Right.
opportunity because for some reason you didn't deserve to be there.
Yeah, it was also just weird for me. Like these people are way too happy. They act like they like each other. Like all that kind of, it's just like weird, right?
You're not
And so
cut out for that.
I tried to fix it, so to speak, and make it normal, like the kind of normal that I had, which was
Mm,
like church songs were screamed, not sung.
mm,
And
mm.
then like it'd be Amazing Grace, but screaming. And I'm going to
Mm.
do all of you a favor, not do that. So Amazing Grace, for an example, would be screamed while
Mm,
pots and pans are being thrown, cupboards are being slammed. So that
mm,
created a disconnect in my mind, right?
mm. Wow.
Um, well,
I'm just
so as
curious. I'm just curious. What was your turning point? When did you decide I am done with this
in 2020,
finger pointing, this shame, this guilt,
in
this
2020.
I am done with this. What happened? Take us there.
Well, to get there, we
Because
should start to get to
mm,
2020. We should start in 1997. That's the first time I was suicidal.
wow. Mm,
Um, and that came because my identity is
mm,
I am bad.
mm,
Like it's like I don't do bad things. I don't make
mm.
mistakes. I am a mistake. I am bad.
Wow. Where did that come from?
What I picked up as a kid in all these different church environments I'd been in and the relationships that I'd had being
Okay.
bounced around, like all this kind of
Okay.
stuff, right?
Okay.
Um, again, I was abused. And so I'll say this, my
Mm,
parents and I have a much better relationship today than we did then,
mm,
right? So they did some things that would have been better if they hadn't done, but
mm,
um, whatever. We've healed a lot of that relationship. We don't have a
mm,
perfect relationship today, but we have a much better relationship than we did. So it's going to be a little bit dark, but it doesn't mean that, they're bad people and we still, we hate each other, all that thing, right? It's
mm,
just a thing that happened at the time.
mm,
But I was abused and rejected by my mother. I was neglected by my father.
mm,
And then in all these different foster placements, I'm always the outsider.
mm,
And then through school and all that stuff, right?
mm,
So by the time in 97, I'm 24 years old. And by then I'm an overgrown truck driver.
mm,
And I'm finding all kinds of external things to like, if I have money, then, and I did, I'm a single guy who's driving a truck. So I had some money. Like I'm
mm.
not buying helicopters or anything, but I have some money.
Mm,
And so I spent it. I spent it to be able to spend time
mm,
um, and what that led to is, but I'm also raised in a church, right? So I know
mm,
all the Bible verses that talk about this is sin. I
mm.
treated every one of those Bible verses like it was a wet paint sign.
Wow.
I don't know what you guys do in your country about wet paint signs, but here, if there's a wet paint sign, we touch it.
Mm.
Sign says wet paint, we touch it to see if it's still wet. So I treated all those Bible verses that says this is sin like a wet paint sign. I'm just going to touch that and see,
Mm.
right? So that left me with again, it's not like sin is something that I do, it's I am. Hold on a moment. My dog just unplugged my,
Mm.
maybe we're okay. Um, so in 97, I was in the other Bible verses that I knew were verses to point to I should be condemned,
Wow.
right? For instance, the verse in Romans, the wages of sin is death. And so I finally
Mm.
decided I'm sitting in the back of my truck and I'd be like, you know what? Why bother? I'm
Mm.
just going to go get paid.
Mm.
Like right now, I'm just going to go get paid.
Mm.
And so um, I got interrupted. Like I'm holding
Mm.
the gun, the hammer's back. I'm looking at the bullet. Um, and I'm actively taking up slack on the trigger. When
Mm.
I got interrupted with, are you still going to read that book? Not just a thought out of nowhere. Are you still going to read that book?
Mm.
So now I'm in a conversation that I hadn't expected. That book was uh, Robert Schuller's book, Self-Love.
Mm.
So I read that book for a bit, right? The argument basically was if you continue doing what you're doing, you won't be able to read the book.
Mm.
But if you read the book first and want to come back to this, you still can. Well, that logic
Mm.
worked for me. And so I'm like, okay, I didn't buy the book, so I guess I'll read it. Then I'll
And
come
then
back to this.
I'll come back to my life.
Yeah. So I just set the gun down, picked up the book with the plan to pick the gun back up when I was done reading the book. What
Oh,
happened instead?
is that when you were trying to commit suicide?
Yep, yep,
Wow.
yep.
Okay.
I was in
Mm-hmm.
the middle of, I was actively pulling the trigger. I was taking up slack in the trigger
Mm.
when I was interrupted by that thought.
Mm.
So by the time that was done, by, by the time I'm done reading the book, then I got
Mm.
a pager system that we had in the truck, but at that time in the semi,
Mm.
that I had to go and pick up a load. So that load gave me purpose, right? Go do this task. That load gave me purpose. That purpose meant I had value. I had value to the trucking company.
Mm.
It didn't make me not suicidal. What happened for me is that suicide became just a task I needed to get done.
Wow.
Like, oh yeah, it's the first of the month and I need to pay my mortgage this month. It's just a task I need to get done. I didn't have any emotion about it. Um, I certainly didn't tell anybody because I knew that other people would have an emotion about it,
Mm.
right? And so I'm not going to tell anybody.
Mm.
So there were lots of times over lots of years when, like, I would have that thought, like, you have time right now, we can just get this done.
Wow.
And I would sometimes think about, let's see, nobody's home right now. I don't expect anybody to be home for the next couple of hours. I'd have time
Mm-hmm.
to get this done and make sure it was successful.
Okay, hold
Or,
on.
well,
So hold on. So you now have a job, but you have it on your agenda to commit suicide.
yep,
You just need to do
yep,
it right. You just need to make sure it succeeds. And so you're now
yep,
plotting in your head how you're going to commit suicide, and you're reading this book that is saying self-love. But one of the things you need to get done is just take your life.
yeah, just a task I need to do. Yep,
Wow.
like paying for my insurance.
Wow.
Yep. Um, so, and sometimes the thoughts would come like quite randomly, right?
Mm.
My wife and I have just gone and done this fun thing together. And then she's leaving to go and visit her friends. And I'm like, well, now, you got time now. Like just randomly out of nowhere.
Okay. You're
I get
married, you have a
reminded.
wife, you have kids, and you're
Yeah.
getting these reminders to take your life.
Yeah. I'm like, hey, there's
Wow.
still this thing that you haven't done. You said that you were going to do this and you haven't.
Wow.
It became like a promise I have to keep to myself. Right.
Mm.
So that was like come and go. And I own a business. I employ people. Um, and I serve customers, like all that kind of stuff. I'm doing all the
Mm.
external things that I have to do, but
Mm.
everything in my life is a task because
Mm.
I have value based on what I do.
Mm.
I don't have any value for who I am.
Wow. Everything is, I need to do this. I have to do this. It's a
Yep,
task I have to get done. That's it. Like, there's no meaning in life. There's no connection to your innate value. Nothing.
yep, yep. I know how
Wow.
to
Okay.
sing the songs when I go to church, so things don't
Mm.
look weird. I know how to sing the
Mm.
songs when I go to church. I know how to smile for the camera, like all that kind of stuff. So in
Mm.
2020, I
Mm.
became a nurse in 2015. Then I became a travel nurse not long after that.
Mm.
And so I'd go around to different hospitals. It fit me well because I'm used to being the outsider,
Mm.
right? Like my whole life I've been the outsider. So, okay, I'll just be the outsider as a nurse. I didn't do it
Wow.
for that. I thought I was
Mm.
doing a good thing for my family and my career when I started traveling. But anyway,
Mm.
by 2020, I've been traveling for a few years. I don't have a very good relationship with my wife. I don't have a very good relationship with my kids. Um,
Mm.
and, uh, I've got friends that here at home, but nobody calls me when I'm traveling. And when I
Mm.
do come home, I'm an interruption to everybody because, of course, they have a regular routine and then I just pop in randomly for a couple of days here and there. So I'm an interruption. Like that's how I see myself. I see myself as an interruption. As opposed to I'm going to come and visit you and you're like, hey, this is great. Let's spend a few days together and we can do these things and won't this be wonderful? Right? No, I was just an interruption. Like, oh, okay, well, he's here. Now we have to figure out like what we're going to do with him. Right? That's how I feel. That's how I felt at the time. So it's 2020. I took the job. I took this particular assignment with a plan. I'm going to be out of state.
Okay.
So what we were talking about when that blinked out was the intersection of mental health and personal growth. This became the intersection for me for mental health and personal growth. Okay. So it's 2020. I took an assignment out of state. I'm a travel nurse. I took an assignment out of state with the plan to go down there. I'm going to make some money. I'm going to pay some debt down, stack up some cash, set my family up as well as I can. And then I'm just going to complete this task on my way home. This task that's been hanging out since 1997 that I still haven't gotten done yet. I'm finally going to clip that off my boxes. That's my plan. And I took the gun with me that I intended to use. So in this, all right. So I'm holding on this particular date, like this is how black I am. I'm working with people that are actively suicidal. I'm in a psych unit in the ER.
Like your job is actually for the same thing. Like you actually work with people who are suicidal. Wow.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And like we can set you up for help, but I am not worth help.
So you're helping everybody else, but not yourself.
Right. Wow. I'm not worth it. Yep.
Wow.
So, and I'm doing well, right? So I've figured out how to hide there's a lot of people that, in the US at least, we're walking down the hallway and I see at work like, hey, how you doing? I don't expect you to actually answer that question. It's just a thing we say. And so the standard answer, like the correct answer is, yeah, I'm doing great. That's the correct answer. Well, it might not be real. It might not be the truth.
But it's the expected.
But I don't actually expect you to answer the question. And on your side, if you did answer the question, you don't expect me to actually stand there and listen to you. Or maybe trust me to tell you you maybe don't even trust me to tell me what's going on because I'm going to go to the water cooler and tell everybody else, hey, do you know what Sally said? Right?
The word is not
that
safe.
Kind of yeah.
Wow.
So the answer is, I'm going to help you get the help that you feel like you need, but I'm not worth it. Plus, I already have a plan. Like, I know what I'm doing.
I'm sorted. I'm good.
Like, I did. It's twisted. It's twisted and dark, but I do have a purpose. I don't have any value, but I do have a purpose.
To end my life.
And I have responsibility. My responsibility is I'm going to finish this task that I started decades ago. Right? So I do have clear purpose. I'm just not doing it yet.
Wow.
Because I'm going to finish this job first and set my family up as well as I can. I've never written a note. I've read a lot of notes. I've read lots and lots of suicide notes. But I've never written one. And the reason I haven't written one is I didn't want to have to write the things I'd have to for the note to be true. I'm just not going to write one.
Wow.
That's my thought process. It's kind
of dark. You have a wife, you have kids. And so what you're doing is just making sure there's money in that account so they never suffer. Otherwise, you're clear, you're going to kill yourself.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And they'll do fine. They can, she can get a replacement guy. My kids will be like, oh, okay, well, I guess we'll just move on. Like, that's how I'm thinking.
Just like that.
And a lot of the people I've talked to, so either as a first responder or as a nurse in the ER in a mental health unit,
Mm.
I've had I've talked with lots and lots and lots of people who are
Mm.
suicidal, and we get whatever the exit was. Ultimately, what
Mm.
happens is that person's suicidal because I no longer have value.
Bottom
So,
line.
for example,
Mm.
yeah. So, for example, I'm talking with a 16-year-old kid in an emergency department who came in because he is suicidal, and so
Mm.
that's why he was brought in
Mm.
because he's suicidal.
Mm.
And he said, so I asked him, his mom is in the room, and I asked him, tell me what's going on. Tell me your story. And so he did.
Mm.
And he said, I'm worthless. He said those words, I am worthless.
Oh.
And so I agreed with him. That made the mom kind of angry because she'd never heard a healthcare person agree that
Mm.
somebody is worthless. But I agreed with him.
You understood
Like,
where I
okay,
came
well,
from. Mm.
you probably are worthless. Like I've never met you before, so I don't know you that well. So you might be right. You probably are worthless.
Mm.
So explain to me. Tell me why you're worthless.
Mm.
And so he did. And everything he said had to do with things he had either done or not done.
Mm.
Okay. This is important. Everything he said, this was true for me
Mm.
too. The reason that I didn't have any value is because of things I had done or not done.
Mm.
I'd done bunch of bad stuff.
Mm.
And so this kid is telling me like all these things that he's either done or not done, and that's why he's worthless.
Oh.
He's just full of shame. And I was
Mm.
full of shame.
Mm.
So then I asked his mom, who's in the room this whole time. I asked his
Mm.
mom, like, what do you think? Is he worthless?
Mm.
Mom said, no, he's super valuable. Like,
Mm.
how could you even ask that question? So again, right in the beginning, we talked about relationship, identity,
Mm.
value, purpose,
Mm.
responsibility. So we're going to go relationship, identity, value. So I asked mom, what do you think? Is he worthless? And she's like, no, how could you even ask that question?
Mm.
He's my son. That's
Mm.
both relationship and identity. And then I asked her, like, okay, why do you think he has value?
Mm.
Every one of her answers were about who he is. Every one of his answers were about things he had done.
Mm. That's
Her
really good.
answers were about who
Mm.
he is
Mm.
or who he is to me, right? He is my son.
Mm.
So in 2020, so we worked that through. The reason that I agreed with him if he's whether he's worthless or not
Mm.
is because I've responded to a bunch of head-on collisions. So in fact, I was trying to get my wife to understand this some months ago, and she's not getting it. And so I finally said, you know what? I want a divorce.
Wow.
Well, that she's suddenly paying attention because that came out of nowhere. I want a divorce, right? So she said, why? My answer is because you don't love me anymore.
Mm.
What do you guess her answer was?
Mm.
What
What
would you
makes you
guess?
say? What makes you say that?
Okay, that actually would be better. That actually would have been better. She
Mm.
said, no, I do love you,
Wow.
right? You don't love
Mm.
me anymore. No, I do love you. Well, what we've done then is we've created a head-on collision
Mm.
because I'm going this way. You don't love me anymore. She's coming this way. Yes, I do. We have a head-on collision.
Mm.
I've responded to a bunch of head-on collisions when I was a paramedic. And a head-on collision like every one of them have a few things in common. They're
Mm.
loud, they're messy, they're dirty. Nobody wants to be there. Lots of people are angry. Somebody's going to get hurt. Head-on
Mm.
collision has a bunch of things in common. And that's
Mm.
what we've just created. You don't love me anymore. Yes, I do. That's a head-on collision.
Mm.
That kid that I'm talking to in the ER, he'd been with a therapist before. He talked to his parents before, right? I'm worthless. No, you're not. You have huge value, like all that kind of stuff, right?
Mm.
That's a head-on collision. That's why he saw it that way.
Mm.
Or if you tell your kid, like, go brush your teeth, what's your kids say? No, I don't want to, right? They push back, right?
Mm.
So that's what he's doing. So when he said I'm worthless, I just agreed with him.
Mm.
And the reason is because I avoided the head-on collision.
Mm.
I was in the Navy. I was on a really big boat, and not an aircraft carrier, but still a really big boat, which is pretty good at going straight ahead, but they really
Mm.
suck at parallel parking.
Mm.
A boat was 700 something feet long. It sucked at parallel parking.
Mm.
But sometimes it had to tie up sideways to the pier. And so we used a tugboat. And a tugboat came alongside the boat and nudged it over a little at a time. The captain is still in control. The captain is still like steering his boat and whatever, or
Mm.
telling people to steer the boat. But the tugboat is nudging the boat a little bit at a time.
Mm.
And eventually the boat ends up tied up to the pier where it belongs. And so I was being a tugboat for this guy. I avoided the head-on collision, but we still needed to go a different direction. So I helped him to turn a little at a time. And he left the ER ready to go back to talk to a therapist, not feeling suicidal anymore.
Wow.
So for me, let's go back to that room. I'm out of state on a job, and I'm holding the gun and
Mm.
thinking about the final steps. I'm
Mm.
thinking about where am I going to stop? Like what time of day, what kind of place do I have to look for to make sure I don't get interrupted? Like all this
Mm.
kind of thing, right? When I hear a, a voice that says, I wonder how important you must really be. This
Mm.
is the intersection of mental health and personal growth. I wonder how important you must really be. And my answer is,
Mm.
well, not very important, right? For all those things. I don't have a good relationship at home. Friends don't call me. I'm just a replaceable monkey picking up a spot on the calendar at this hospital. I'm not theirs, right?
Mm.
All this thing. I either go to work or go to my room, go to work, like, that's my life, right?
Mm.
Okay, I make money, but I pay bills with my money. Like, okay, and right? I see Instagram life, I see all that other kind of stuff, but I don't have one of those, right? So
Mm.
what is the purpose? Well, there isn't any, except this one task I got to do. So the question was, do you? I wonder how valuable you must really be. How important are you really? Like, not very
Mm.
important. So the conversation goes like, well, I wonder if that's true because it seems to me like all the different things in your life that could have killed you, none of them have.
Mm.
And so you've become your own worst enemy. Like, well, I hadn't thought of it that way, but I was. Because if somebody else had pointed a gun at me, that happened when I was in the military. Somebody pointed a gun at me and I expressed my displeasure.
Mm.
And so we worked it out and I took the gun away from him. I got in a little trouble for that, um, but here I was holding the gun, like just
Mm.
calmly thinking about, the day coming up in a few weeks, right?
Mm.
So I had
Mm.
become my own worst enemy. So then the question was, this is a question of value.
Mm.
Do you have value that you don't see? Do you have value that you don't see?
Mm.
And my answer was no, I don't have any value. Well, I asked if you have value that you don't see. Is it possible that you have value that you don't see? Like, no. Well, then I had to
Mm.
admit, like, okay, well, it's not likely, but that wasn't the question. The question was, is it possible?
Mm.
I had like, okay, fine. Yeah, it's possible. So law number three in the 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth, that's a John Maxwell book.
Mm.
Law number three is the law of the mirror. The law of the
Mm.
mirror is the reason I'm alive today. And it says that you have to see value in yourself to add value to yourself. You have to see yourself as valuable, and then you'll treat yourself as if you're valuable.
Mm.
I was living the negative side of that law, right? Like the tail side of that law, which is I don't have any value, so I treat myself like I don't have any value. Once upon a time, my son he's 16 years old and he has a car and the car's not working and he doesn't have any money to fix it. And he's
Mm.
angry about that. He's a 16-year-old boy and he's angry that his car doesn't work and he can't fix it, right?
Mm.
So he went outside and beat on it with a hammer or a wrench, just beat on the hood.
Wow.
the car doesn't have any value, so he's treating the car like it doesn't have any value, right? So today he's a mechanic. He does work on cars. You'll be happy to know he doesn't beat on them with a hammer, right? He treats cars as if they're valuable. He sees vehicles as valuable and he treats them like they're valuable. That's an application. That's a tangible application of the third law of growth. I was on the tail side. So when I was willing to admit it's possible that I have value that I don't see, I had to intentionally go and look for it. I had to intentionally go and look for my value. So if you went metal detecting, like in Florida, in the US and Florida and other places, they go metal detecting. The only time I've done that is looking for a pistol that I'd lost in the woods. But if you go metal detecting, then you start with the idea that there must be precious metal buried out in the sand. There's precious metal buried on the beach, and I'm going to go look for it. So you take a day off of work and you rent a metal detector and you go and get sunburned and you like do all that stuff because you start with the idea that I think that there might be value out there and I'm going to go look for it. That's what I had to do. Today, that's what I help people do. Let's go metal detecting. Let's go out and look for the value.
Let's assume there's some value and let's go look for it. So I would love for you to take my hand and take me step by step. If I didn't know what value I brought and I was suicidal or even about to consider it, I was just miserable in life, self-sabotaging, all of the things. Like if I was in a place where it was evident that I'm not seeing my value, give me kind of, and I know you've talked about relationship, identity, value, purpose, responsibility, and I'm happy to go there. But I'd like you to hold our hand and kind of show us, how do I do metal detecting? Like, how do I find my own value so that I stop self-sabotaging? Because now I have purpose and responsibility in the world.
Do you know the phrase add value to people? Like, I want to add value to people.
I know the phrase, but I believe there is someone who doesn't even know what it means because they don't know that they have anything to add.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah. So if we're going to start there, then we'd start talking about your relationships. What do your relationships look like? Kind of the same kind of journey that you took me on in the beginning part of the conversation, right? Tell me your story. And so for me, that starts with just tell me your story. I like to scuba dive. I like to scuba dive where it's dark and cold. And I like warm water too, but I do like to scuba dive where it's dark and cold. So when I'm talking with somebody, we can go just as dark or just as cold as they need to go. I'll go all the way to the bottom with you. And I will come back. I will come back with you. So it starts there. Let it be just as raw and ugly as it is.
So are we still looking for relationship, identity, value, purpose,
well, that conversation is going to be a lot about relationships. Like even when it's dark and cold, that conversation is going to be a lot about relationships. Like mine was, right? My early relationships with my parents were unpleasant, right? Growing up as a kid where I'm always someplace different and I'm always different than other people because I'm someplace different, right? So I've got a very different experience than other kids in the same grade, right? Who all have been through all these different grades together. Right. So that conversation really is going to be mostly about relationships and the identity that you took from those relationships. Now, I'm a Christian and I'm not going to, like, again, this isn't a Sunday morning service and I don't have anything to sell about this, but I still do come from that direction, right? So I believe that this is Romans 8:5 maybe comes to mind. God demonstrated his love for us in this way, that while we were still sinners, while we didn't have a relationship with him, Christ died for us. So I was very valuable to this mystical figure in the big book. I was very valuable to him before I could do anything for him.
Mm.
Right. So there's somebody, so that's from my own perspective. But if somebody didn't want to be religious or go that way, that's okay.
Mm.
With that as the example, there is a relationship in your life that is similar to that,
Mm.
and we'll find it.
Mm.
So for that 16-year-old boy that's in the ER, right?
Mm.
He wasn't able to see it at that time until I pulled it out of him and his mother. So I did that on purpose. I agreed with him that he's worthless on purpose. Again, right? Like
Mm.
a tugboat, so that I could then ask his mother about his value.
Mm. Mm.
They had two different answers, right? So his thing was about all the things I've done or haven't done, and her answer was about who he is.
Mm.
And so then I went back to the kid and I'm like, well, like, gosh, those are different answers. It's possible that she's lying to you.
Mm.
She's in the ER and there's a lot of stress going on. So it's possible she's lying to you.
Mm.
Like, I don't know y'all. Do you think she's
Mm.
lying? And he said, no, I don't think she's lying. Well, it's possible she's also just wrong. That's possible too. Like, she thinks you have value, but she's wrong. That's possible. Or is it also possible that she sees things that you don't see? And I let him pick which answer seemed truthful for him, like which fit for him. And he picked the one, well, she's looking at it differently than I do.
Mm.
Okay. Well, how about from there? Are you able to like borrow her vision for a minute,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
And let's start working from there.
Mm. So let me see if I understand. In whatever situation someone finds themselves in, stuck, just really lost value, doesn't like their life, what you're saying is, let's look at the relationships down your timeline and see what happened there. Because it's possible that you picked up a lot of things. I'm going to try and mumble through the process, and I want you to help me bring some light, because I would love for us to deliver this process. So what I'm picking is, there's relationships that have happened in your life, and you've driven meaning and identity out of those relationships, and ultimately they've gotten you where you are. So what I'm picking from you is, we're going to go down the timeline, look at the relationships you've had, and possibly see what you picked off of that. Once we pick a relationship, we're able to drive the identity it gave you. And if we can change the relationship you have, then we can change where you're going, because it's a relationship that gives you identity, which identity shows you your value, which value shows you your purpose, which purpose gives you responsibility for life. So if we can change the relationship that you have, or the identity you're having with this relationship, we can change everything, but we need to change the relationship that you have at the top of the funnel. Take me
Yep.
there, like help me understand how it works and how that is connected to when I was 5, I was abandoned, and when I was 10, I was married, and when I was 20, I was divorced, and when, like, how does that come back to someone's timeline of everything that has happened to kind of tell them that they have no value to offer, to a point where you're now saying, is it that you don't have value, or is it that you don't see the value? Like, help me understand that flip, because I think I understand when, if you change the relationship and your identity, that can drop into you seeing your value, which value gives you purpose, which purpose gives you, I think I understand that zigzag puzzle, but I'm failing to understand the timeline and how we're able to condense that into, oh, I see my value, I'm not as worthless as I'm thinking. Could you help me take me there?
So for some people, that definitely would go to therapy, and I'm not a therapist. Coaching is very different than therapy.
Mm.
So we don't spend a huge amount of time on yesterday,
Yeah.
right? Or
Mm.
lots of yesterdays ago, right? I don't spend a lot of time on the way
Mm.
my parents treated me when I was young, right?
Mm.
Those things did happen,
Mm.
and it's possible that those things need to get worked on with a therapist. That's a very different thing.
Mm.
And therapy has value. I personally have not gone to therapy.
Mm.
Um, but again, because that came from a position of I'm not worth it, right?
Mm.
So otherwise I probably would have. Um, Also, I was subjected to a bunch of therapists as a kid, and so I had a very
Mm.
negative view for a long time, right? Until I got to
Mm.
know some of them working in healthcare, and then
Mm.
I came to see them differently,
Mm.
right? So for me, I
Mm.
came from that position. I was subjected to them, and
Mm.
they attacked me
Mm.
um, as a kid, right? So it's possible that some of that stuff has to be just set aside for a moment, and we're not going to. It's not about healing. It's not necessarily about healing those past events,
Mm.
right? That may come in the future, or it may
Mm.
come by working with a therapist. So
Mm.
coaching is mostly forward focused. You are here. We're going to talk a little bit about how you got here because that's important too. Like my
Mm.
car does have a rear view mirror, but the biggest part of my car is the windshield that faces forward, right?
Mm.
So I spend
Okay.
most of my time facing forward.
Mm. So,
It
so what
doesn't
you're
mean that what
saying,
happened,
what you're saying is life happened and that's fine, but it's brought you here, and we're focused on what do you want and where do we need to start from to get there. Like this is
yep,
you want someone who is like, okay, I want this thing to change. And you just focus on the thing and creating how can you derive relationship and identity from where they are to move forward, or is there more?
yeah. So I start with the proposition of value.
Okay.
And then from there, depending on what the person needs, then we can go
Mm.
either to identity and relationship or it's not forward and backwards. It's not that.
Mm.
We draw it in a line and it'll look forward and backwards, but it's not, it's a, it can, I don't know, continuum is the right word or,
It's not the
uh,
therapy way of doing it. It doesn't
oh
help
no,
going through the years and the years. My question though is, what are some of the questions I can ask myself if I don't know where to look, if I don't know that I have value, if I don't know what I have to offer myself, later on anybody else? Where should I start? Are there certain questions I can ask to kind of land on my value?
yeah. Um, it's a little bit hard for me to like make it up as a role play, right? I've done a
So
lot of that,
so
but
now we
in
have
a
we have
conversation,
mm,
um, your experiences matter,
mm,
right? The premise of your thing and lots of other podcasts or their stories are important. So from
mm,
your story, which is the rear view mirror, right? Your
mm,
story is the rear view mirror. I'm looking backwards and these are the things that happen. These are places I've been.
mm,
Those things are important. And from there, we can pick out, okay, how do you now view the other things, the things that are in front of you,
mm,
right? And it might be dark. That's okay. We can clean a windshield. If the windshield gets dirty, we can clean a windshield. That's fine.
mm, mm,
Um, so from the experiences that you've had, and we'll talk about how you view things moving forward,
mm,
right? Part of the value that you have is going to be you're going to look at things very differently than I do.
mm,
You might not have, I'm working with a lady right now who wants to move from bedside nursing into where she's, just clocking in and starting IVs and giving medicine and just bedside stuff that we do. And she
mm,
wants to go to where she's working with teaching hospital systems about using pharmaceutical drugs and equipment, not selling it
mm,
necessarily, but teaching them how to use it.
mm,
So she wants to completely go to a very different kind of nursing. The thing is that she doesn't have the experience. This lady doesn't have the experience that directly matches like the keywords and tricky phrases in the job description
mm,
because I have just been a bedside nurse for the last 17 years.
Mm.
And so what we're doing is we're picking through, she and I, we're picking through the things that she's done as a bedside nurse
Mm.
and helping her to see the value there that applies to this thing that she wants to do. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So that's about a job, but the same kind of thing fits in a relationship when we're going to looking at relationship and identity. The same kind of thing fits, right? So we're starting with value, like what have you done?
Mm.
And then we pull out from those things that she's done the way that her experiences fit with the job description that she's trying to get.
Mm.
That's what we're working on.
Mm. Is there any other kind of experiment you can pick? Is there any other scenario you can pick up to explain the process? I liked the one with the suicidal boy at the ER.
Yeah. Let's
Do you,
let's talk
uh,
about.
yeah, let's pick someone and kind of see how that went for them. I feel like it'll be a very good way to look at it.
Okay.
Mm.
Um, so I've got a friend here in town. The thing that we worked on together was the relationship that he has with his sons,
Okay.
right? Now he didn't have
Mm.
a value question. He was clear on these are my
Mm.
boys,
Mm.
right? But they had unhappy relationships, like the way that they talk to each other and whether they
Mm.
talk to each, like all that kind of stuff, right?
Mm.
And so we spent we spent several sessions working through that, which is related to identity. So relationship and identity were set, right? We can't. I have sons, so no matter what they do, I still love my sons, and they're still my sons, and I'm still their father.
Mm.
Um, and so that is set. So then we worked on seeing the value in those relationships, which impacted because I see this as valuable, I treat it as valuable. That's law
Mm.
three, right? The law of the mirror. It's not that he wasn't valuing his sons, but we looked at the value differently, and that changed the way that they communicate. So he and both of his boys have a better relationship today, like a closer relationship today than they did have.
Because he saw his own value.
Right. Well, we began to look at the value differently, right?
Mm. Mm.
Because relationships change over time, right? His boys were no longer young kids that live in his house. They're both
Mm.
young men that are off in the world doing their things.
Mm.
And so that relationship has to change because the value that they bring to the relationship changes. The way that they look at the relationship changes.
Mm.
So the relationship shouldn't end. Like neither
Mm.
my boys don't live in my house anymore, but they're still my sons. I just I talk with them differently. They talk with me differently. Right. In fact, they're both husbands, they're both fathers. So our relationship has changed.
Mm.
Right. If anything, actually there's more value. Our relationship is deeper.
Mm.
Right. So um I'm working with an old guy. This is sometime last year, I think. So I'm working with an old guy who says he came into my unit complaining that he was suicidal. And he's suicidal because he doesn't like some of the changes that are going on in his life as he gets older.
Mm.
Well, one of the things that he wanted was I don't want to have to use a walker.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So that was really important to him. I don't want to have to use a walker.
Mm.
And so when he came in, like there are other factors going on too, but like that was one of the, I'm old. I may as well just check out.
Wow.
Right. Because one of the bad things that we've done in society is suicide is really just kind of an option.
Mm.
Suicide has become much more accepted, than it once was. We certainly talk about it much more than we did, which is good.
Mm.
But it's just kind of become an option. So one of the things that we worked on was who I am as a person, which is identity, who I am as a person. So for him, one of the things that helped him is I suggested instead of talk about I don't want to, which is what he was on, right? The subconscious just picks up that negative then. I don't want to. Like, how about instead frame it as I'm a person who walks independently. And so we worked on that over a period of days while he's in my unit. And he began to see himself as more positive. He began to see himself as he does have value. He's still able to do lots of things, right? With family, with friends, and so activities he likes to do. Might have to do some of them differently. But when we started with identity, I am a person who walks independently. So it's not always this great, it's not always this great big, explosive thing. For him, it was simply, I don't want to use a walker.
Wow.
I don't want to have to be so dependent on other people. So we set that as a goal. We phrased it as identity. This is who I am. I'm a person who walks independently, which was also his purpose.
Wow.
Right. So for departing shots, you have innate value. And we can find it. It may look different for each different person, but you do have innate value. You have innate God-given value that nothing that you've done or didn't do, nowhere that you've been or haven't been, right? None of those things diminishes your value. None of them, right? So we can find that. Not everybody that talks to me decides they want to work with me, and that's okay. So I would suggest just give me a call, send me an email, and let's find a time to get together. Let's just visit. And I'll help you begin to find your value. And if you choose that you want to work together, then great. And if you choose that you don't want to, then I'm going to set you up with some resources that you can, if you're more of a DIYer, I'm going to do it myself, right? Then great. I was a DIYer. I get it. So then I'll set you up with some resources like what I used where you can do it yourself then, if that's what you'd like to do.
What I'd like to do
through it, then we'll do that.
Yeah. What I'd like to do is present some resources in the show notes. So if you're listening and you're like, okay, where do I go from here? There'll be some resources in the show notes that you can click on to see different ways how you can proceed this conversation with Steve. But ultimately, if you're in a place where you do not like your life, you do not like what you see, you do not like where you're taking things, your relationship seems complicated, there is a high chance that you do not see your value rightly, or your value is there, but it's wrapped around sandpaper. And so really what Steve does is help you dig for the gold. Because once you find your value, everything changes. There's a saying from Jim Rohn, I think, and that saying was, when you change, everything around you changes for you. When you get better, everything around you gets better. And we do this really from what is my value? What value do I bring to me? What value do I bring to others? It's such a liberating thing to do for yourself, because no matter where you go, there you are. And so we might as well start with the thing that is really in the way. And so if you're feeling called to work with Steve or dig in more of what he's come up with, since he was in the same place, really planning to commit suicide and take his life because he didn't think he was valuable, because he thought he was a bad guy, then this is really something that can really help you. This is a path that you may want to adventure. But ultimately, the best way you can help Steve's work is look around. Who is the first Connection. Someone that you really have like a grade 1 connection with that desires this work. I guarantee you're not watching this because you stumbled on this video. You're watching this because you're being picked to be the vessel for this message. So who do you know that needs to hear this work? Who needs to find their value? Who needs to dig for the gold? We would love for you to share this episode with them. Steve, is there anything else that you would like to add before we say goodbye to the listener?
A lot of my relationships changed when I decided to change the way that I communicate. So the relationships led to, I don't have any value, right? I don't have good relationships. When I decided to, I'd spent a lot of time thinking about you need to. When I changed it to I need to, and I needed to change the way I communicated, then my relationships began to improve, and then the value in the relationships I could see them more clearly, right? So it was a communication problem was one of the problems that was existing. I help people do that.
When you can see yourself clearly, you can see others clearly, and your relationships get better because you have a clear lens. Before then, if you don't see your value and you're buried in shame, you have a tinted lens. And so everything people tell you is filtered through your lens. And every time someone says something, you pick up blame and shame and guilt, and you bounce back off them with that. But really, their intentions may be pure. They might be loving on you. They might be providing the Jesus type of love, but you're not able to be loved, or there's no one who will make you better, or there's no one who will make you happier because you don't believe you deserve to be happy in the first place. Right. You don't believe you deserve love to be in the first place. You don't believe you deserve good intentions from people. And it's like you're always thinking that people are not as pure as they can be because you don't have like a pure lens of the world. And so you're always looking for like the thing to affirm that you're not good enough, you're not worthy, and all of those things. And so I hope that Steve and I have somehow steered you one step towards the solution, which is really you looking on the inside and finding your innate value, which you have. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a pulse. There is no one on this planet who has no value. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a pulse. And sometimes you just need somebody else, somebody I call like believing eyes or believing ears, or somebody who sees you better than you see yourself. And that is why Steve is here, to help you dig for the gold. So I really hope you dig in. I hope you dig in. I appreciate you for showing up for yourself and taking in this. Really appreciate that. And Steve, thank you so much.
Let's talk.
Yeah, thank you so much for sparing the time to share with us, to pour into this community. We really cannot take that journey for granted. We can't take the moments for granted that you had to overcome to be here. We can't take for granted the fact that you didn't pull that trigger. And so we really celebrate you and appreciate you and honor you here at the Best Kept Secret. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
All righty. Until next time, my friends, be well, stay well, sending you light and love. Thank you for joining this conversation on the World's Best Kept Secret podcast today. If you feel ready to stop keeping your work a secret, head over to primajope.com and request